Yo, what's happening, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Woo! Yeah, so I started putting a scoop of espresso in my morning coffee. Yo, let's go. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about how to transition from beginner to intermediate. Now, I think this is one of the most difficult transitions to make because a lot of times it's just there's so much information you don't know what to do with it. Where do I go from here? What do I learn? So I kind of thought of some key points that I think could help, a person who's maybe more of a beginner, and this can kind of start that transition into a more intermediate style guitar player. Now, there's not some magical lick that I can teach you that will, set you on this path, but there are some tips that I think that you can follow that will really, really help. I know it helped me, and it's helped a lot of students that I've taught, and we're just gonna go. So we're gonna go and jump on into this one. So step number one to becoming a more intermediate style guitar player from beginner. And I think that this is a very, very common one that happens and it discourages people a lot, and that is don't overload yourself with knowledge. I would have a lot of players who had been playing for a very long time who would say like, I know all this stuff, I know all these scales and patterns and all this, and I don't know how to use any of it. And I think what happens is that we get too caught up in trying to learn every scale, every mode, all these different things. And I think the best advice is to find whatever one, works best for you. I do recommend the pentatonic scale. And try to get good at just using the pentatonic scale. Just because you know how to play the scale, that doesn't mean that you're good at it, necessarily. I don't mean that in like a, jerk, disrespectful way. I'm just saying, like, make sure you're really exploring each one. Because just knowledge for the sake of knowledge and not application seems, like the wrong way to approach it to me. I could be wrong, but so what I did was I spent a lot of time on the pentatonic scale, and this happened a lot when I would have students come in. I'd be like, do you already know your pentatonic scale? And they're like, oh yeah, I know that, I know the modes. And I'm like, okay, so have you ever done this with it? And they're like, oh, no, I've never played it that way before. And I'm like, okay, so this is where we're going to start. We're going to go back to the pentatonic scale, and we would explore all these different avenues of how to play it, how to navigate it. And they would be like, wow, I never knew you could do this with the pentatonic scale. And I just think in the beginning we get so overloaded with thinking that we need to just, learn every little thing, and we don't really focus on applying it as much as we do just learning and increasing our knowledge. And then it's like, well, how do I use all this stuff? And I think that hinders a lot of people from making that transition, because you're going to see what I'm going to talk about next is really, diving in and using what we know. Alright, so next is start writing music. You know what? You'll never learn more about yourself and your own playing than when you start writing your own music. It is truly just such a gateway to this melting pot of everything that you've learned. And I think that sometimes, as players, maybe we think we can't write our own music, or we think we're not good enough to do it. But I'm telling you what, right from the beginning, you can start writing your own music. You don't need a lot of knowledge to start writing your own music. I mean, just use your ear if you have to. Just, like I said, without even thinking or looking at the guitar, I could come up with. I'm just using my ear. I'm just playing off of the rhythm and stuff that I'm using. So, like I said, write music. I'm telling you what, this is such a key component, because to me, one of the biggest things that separate a beginner from an intermediate player is that ability to write and construct songs all of a sudden. Now, like I said, in the beginning stages, you're more about learning everyone else's stuff. You're trying to learn, your favorite AC/DC song and all this other music that you've heard and you want to learn how to play. I think when you start transitioning to intermediate, that's whenever you're in like, oh, I want to start writing my own stuff. And that's where you have to learn how to break down what you've learned and start applying it to your own playing. And sit there and things like the scales and all that. It's going to help you so much with understanding how to connect things. The next point I'm going to talk about is going to be theory here in a second. And I think it's a huge, divider between beginner and intermediate. But I'm telling you what, start writing music. Whether you know a lot of theory or you don't, just start writing. Figure out, use your ear. This is great ear training because, like I said, regardless if you know the chords of a scale or anything like that, you can sit there and still, your ear will tell you when you hear something that sounds good or not, and this is part of it. Your ear is a huge part of transitioning from beginner to intermediate, just being able to hear what should come next. All right, so next is going to be learning some theory. Now, this is kind of what I hit on in that first one by like, don't overload yourself. Like I said, don't try to learn every scale within the first month of playing. Honestly, there are some things that are only going to come with time. And learning theory and how to apply it is one of those things that takes a lot of practice and a lot of repetition to make it make sense. You know, they're like musical math equations, really, is what it is. And just something as simple as, like I talked about our pentatonic scale, and like I said, I think you should really focus on that. But for more of a, chordal approach, just using your major scale, this is something I've talked about a bunch, just using simple chords, knowing that little bit of theory that I just played right there is enormous. It's such just a weapon to use. And what I'm doing there is I'm literally playing the chords of a G major scale. Oh, sorry. It's completely wrong chord. Don't do what I just did. That's all I'm doing there. And like I said, and this helps you build progression. So if I'm kind of like playing a G, boom, I know these chords. And this makes creating music, back to point number 2, so much easier. And now I'm learning how to apply it. Like I said, you have to use what you know. If you don't use it, you lose it. I'm telling you, it's like reading sheet music. I used to know how to read sheet music. I would be the worst at it right now because I just don't use it. So with this stuff, practice. The more you write music, the more you're learning these things, the more you are applying it, the easier it becomes. It becomes second nature, or even like harmonizing something. Like I said, you could come up with a cool little lead line, and you need to know how to harmonize these parts. You gotta know where all your thirds are. All over the place. All over the place on the guitar neck, and this is very, very crucial. I mean, learning how to do what's called chord inversions. If you don't know what chord inversions are, as a beginner, most beginners know they're cowboy chords. And even learning your power chords, it's a different way of playing the chord, so I went G to D. However I did it. But, I can do G chords all over the place, These are all G chords. Do a D chord? Sure, I can do D chords all over the place. It doesn't matter. So learn some theory. You don't have to learn it all. Learn little bits at a time and learn how to apply it. That is going to make the theory that you know much more powerful than knowing a bunch of stuff that you have no clue how to use. Now the final one I'm going to leave off here is, again, there's not really a lick that I can teach you guys to help with this. And this isn't a theory one. This is find your strengths. And what I mean by this is that, all players have something that they are just naturally better at, whether it is, in my case, I was way better at ascending the guitar neck than I was descending. Descending is something that I still struggle with today, that I still work on a lot, but ascending was always my strength. Like, I could always make my way up the fingerboard pretty easily, it came very naturally to me. The descending side was much more difficult. I don't know why. It's the same with like picking and legato. Picking was always stronger for me than legato, and eventually I kind of came to terms that I like the sound of the combination of two versus all of just one. But again, you'll find things that are your strengths and that are your weaknesses. Now, what happens sometimes is people focus completely on their weaknesses. And I'm not saying you shouldn't try to get better at what you're not good at, but don't neglect your strengths, Don't think just because you're good at it that if you don't practice it a lot, that you're not going to lose it. So I think that really honing in, find your strengths and focus on them. There's no reason, you'll never be, as good as you want to be. Most players never are. And why not make those strengths even stronger? And while you're doing that, work on your weaknesses. But don't just hone all of your attention on what you're lacking in your playing. Like, you know, if your picking isn't as sharp or whatever it is, don't focus on those things exclusively. Like, you can work on them, but don't exclude just because you think that you're good at one thing. I'm telling you, you'll lose it, you know? So I really think just making sure that your strengths become even stronger and your weaknesses become strengths. So make sure that that is a section that's going to happen for you, and that's going to help you make that transition from beginner to intermediate. Alright, homies, that's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And, you know, I hope that it maybe helped a little bit. Maybe it was a pointless video. You can let me know down below in the comments, as always. So, thank you guys all so much for being so awesome. And, yo, I'm just going to see you later. So, have a good rest of your day. Woo!